He was a morbidly obese surgeon destined for an operating table and an early death. Now he's a rebel MD who is fabulously fit and fighting to make America healthy again. This is Stay Off My Operating Table with Dr. Philip Ovadia.
And we're live. Bill, what are we doing today? Who is this dude?
Well, today we are once again crossing the vast oceans and the world and connecting with another great, fitness and health professional and influencer down under. So really honored to have Martin Silva on today. I jumped on his podcast, quite a while back now. I think it's been a few months. Had a great time, great conversation, and wanted to get a chance to flip the script and introduce Martin to our audience and find out a little bit more what he's all about. So with that, Martin, welcome to the Stay Off My Operating Table podcast. Why don't you give our audience a little bit of your background?
Thanks for the lovely intro there, Phil. And yes, fitness, essentially you hit the nail on the head. Fitness, I live, breathe, and eat it. And I have done for the last basically 2 decades. I'm 36 now. And I started off, lifting weights when I was 15, 16, to be honest, and always played sports from a young age. Coming from Wales in the UK, I just for the audience, I live in Australia, in Sydney, but I moved here. Well, I came here for a year, 6 years ago, and 6 years later, here we are, permanent resident here. And that's what happens with a lot of British people. They come here, they come here on their work and holiday visa, they never go back. So yeah, always been into sports from a young age. And got into basically personal training as well from a young age, from the age of 20. And yeah, fast forward 15, 16 years. And, I got into bodybuilding and all that kind of stuff as well, which, if we want to talk more on, we can. But that's just a bit more about my career, and I've got an online transformation program now. So I kind of transitioned my program to online, and it's more kind of like mentorship now, and still fitness though, still helping people with nutrition and training. But we all know it's the mindset and the lifestyle stuff. It's kind of the combination of everything which gets people, sustainable results and stuff. So that's what my program's all about now. But yeah, so that's pretty much, I could go deeper into things and stuff, but that's pretty much just a long story short of who I am and where I'm at now in the world in Sydney.
Well, you've done it the right way, which is don't get unhealthy, spend 2 or 3 decades eating crap and not exercising. So I would guess that your message to all the 16-year-olds out there in our audience, both of them, would be do it the right way. But I happen to know that the bulk of our audience is over 40 and probably hasn't done it the right way. Help those folks. What's the main message for those people who have spent the last 20 or 25 years eating the typical crap, sitting in an office, getting more and more out of shape, and have realized I've got to change the way I'm living?
That's a great question. Yeah. Yeah, because the good thing is a lot of my clients, the average age of my client is around between 35 and 40 anyway. So that's the kind of person that I work with generally anyway, on average. So yeah, and just to give a little bit of context as well, it hasn't always been smooth sailing for me in terms of the relationship with food and everything else. I used to really struggle with this. And this is another thing which I think is going to help your audience, whether they're younger or especially the ones over 40. I used to struggle with a poor relationship with food. I did do bodybuilding for quite a few years, a natural bodybuilder. And as a result of that, of overly restricting and where I was at mentally as well, because we all know, well, the reality is your relationship with food, a lot of the times it says more about your relationship with yourself than it does anything else. And at that point, I was essentially, overeating and stuff a lot on the weekends. Even when I wasn't competing, it was just went on for about 2 years where I was on the weekends, just, self-sabotaging, essentially restricting too much in the week, trying to eat, quote unquote, clean, right? As we used to say back then. And then I would just, eat some processed foods on the weekend and get carried away, because those foods are designed to make us overeat. So thankfully for me, like I said, I've always trained. So I've always had that part locked down. But the nutrition stuff and the behaviors with food took me over a decade, to be honest, to kind of crack, even when I was a personal trainer. So that part is challenging. But yeah, my message to those people we're talking to.
Wait. I want to stop you there, because that's
go ahead.
You're training nonstop since you're 16 years old. And I think for most of us, the thought is, oh, I need to work out more. I'm not working out enough. I'm not working out the right way. I'm not, something. And yet you're saying, here's this guy who's a bodybuilder, which, is kind of, we would all like to look like a Greek statue. But you say you had a bad relationship with food. How did that affect your health? And talk about, let's dive deeper into that, because there's an awful lot of us who think if I work out hard enough, then what I eat will be far less important.
I love talking about this, Jack, because it's really important people to understand that I've met a lot of people as well, not to go too far left, but I've met a lot of people, obviously back in my 20s. I'm 36 now. The bodybuilding stuff, just to clarify, was quite a while ago, back in my late 20s. I met a lot of bodybuilders and stuff like that and people within that industry. And I saw more eating disorders, poor relationship with food, and essentially imbalanced lifestyles than I've seen in, the hundreds of people that I've coached over the years. And to be honest, most of the people I've coached, the people I'm speaking to, just Gen Pop, generally anyway, not necessarily bodybuilders. So it's not always about, we judge a book by its cover. That's what we do naturally, but that can be very misleading as well, right? So I was in great shape. To be honest, I looked good aesthetically. People were even, giving me praise, but they didn't know what was going on behind the scenes. So how did that affect me? Essentially, just to give a bit of context again, for about 2 years, what would happen? The weekend would come around after I started the bodybuilding stuff. It's not healthy. It's not a healthy thing to do, right? Just to let people know, with bodybuilding, even if you do it naturally, I've never taken steroids or anything like that. It's not a healthy thing to do for the body, because you're getting down to 3-4% body fat or wherever it was on the calipers. That comes at a price. So what would happen is I didn't really know what I was doing. I hadn't got to the point where I was really in a position to do a bodybuilding comp. If I could have a conversation with my younger self, I just jumped into it. And anyway, so what would happen? I would do the bodybuilding comp, then I would rebound, what I call a symptom eruption, right? I would restrict and suppress all these symptoms of wanting to eat certain foods, and then I would just overeat after the comp. But that went on even when I wasn't competing for about 2 years. So what happened then is on the weekend, I would just go overboard. I would eat Domino's, Ben and Jerry's or whatever, but it would turn into essentially a binge, or at least it was just overeating, like excessively, right? So 2-3 nights normally. And that went on like Friday, Saturday, Sunday, let's just say. And then I would punish myself in the gym as well. So I had that mentality of, that's another thing when you do bodybuilding, you get kind of critiqued against other people, right? So you get told this body part's not good enough, that body part's not good enough. So, it can give you body image issues as well. I think men don't really talk about this enough. I mean, I'm all good now. I've transformed. But back then, I didn't used to like my leg, for example. So I would overeat. And then in the gym the next day, I'm punishing myself the next day. And I'm sure possibly, I reckon a lot of people can relate to this, right? Because sometimes we'll go overboard. We don't plan on doing it. We might essentially sabotage or just go too far on the weekend, for example. And then, right, I've got to go and burn these calories now. And I've got to kind of punish myself. So you're kind of driven by self-hate, right? And like I said, I was in good shape at the time. I'm not going to lie. I was in good shape. So people were like, wow, but no, I was driven internally by self-hate, whereas now it's self-love. But that was a process,
Yeah. So, real interesting how, I guess anything, can be taken to an extreme, and sort of, a positive can certainly turn into a negative. And I think we can, discuss, we can apply that to many aspects of health. I just, to take a little bit of a step back, one thing I don't think we've really talked about previously on the podcast is, the difference between kind of bodybuilding, what you were doing, and strength training. And people might not recognize that, there really are different approaches if you're trying to get, kind of a better physique, versus just building strength, just building muscle. Talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, that's a good question. So I wish I would have known back when I was actually doing bodybuilding that actually, if you focus on strength, for example, maybe doing a lower rep range and actually just focusing on performance, because this is an important thing for the audience, regardless of age. When you focus on performance, so right, I'm going to focus on getting stronger. For example, I'm going to try and get stronger with my squats, my deadlifts, however that looks like to you. It switches your mindset away, because let's be honest, most people want to improve the way their body looks, right? At least 90% of people, let's just be honest. But if you focus too much on that, it becomes it can become a bit obsessive, but also you don't really maximize the results. So if I could go back, I would have focused more on lower rep range and kind of my programming would have been more smart, for example, right? So, and for anyone listening back to this, if they do strength training, they go to the gym and lift weights, right? It's whatever rep range you're not doing, for example, is the one that's going to get you better results. So back then I was just doing like 8 to 10 reps, 8 to 12 reps, typical hypertrophy bodybuilding training for years. And then like I said, I would hammer myself in the gym then and do the high volume stuff. But I always thought exactly what Phil said then. I was like, oh, okay, so strength training, if I do like, maybe 1 to 6 reps or 1 to 5 reps and focus on getting stronger, that's not really going to help me aesthetically, but it does, right? Because it's just another form of hypertrophy you get from that. And it just generally makes you kind of like add density to your muscles. So you have to switch between each rep range and have a smart approach with it. But there's the difference between the two is with bodybuilding, obviously, if we go to the extreme level, it's purely focused on aesthetics, right? It's like, how can I, fine tune things to look as good as I can for the stage. So essentially it's almost like you're looking for that freaky physique, right? You're looking to get conditioned and shredded, the word is right, but you're also looking to get proportion and symmetry, right? So but I think people want that anyway. A lot of people want a aesthetically pleasing physique, right? But the two tied together, to answer your question. So, because you will see the study saying the best rep range is 8 to 12 reps for hypertrophy, but actually it's not. Right? Because I've coached loads of people. I've been through it myself. The new research is actually showing that if you focus on performance and strength, that actually has a lot of carryover into building muscle. So they all have value, but I think it's more the mindset thing to answer that question. Focusing on performance, whether that's, look, I want to do a pull-up, right? Like a lot of my female clients, they want to do pull-ups. So we work towards that. It could even be something extreme like running a marathon, whatever that looks like to you. But if we go back to strength training, I want to hit my PB on, I want to hit, I want to lift double my body weight on deadlifts, for example. When you set those goals and you focus on strength, the funny thing is your body follows, because to get stronger and get those results performance-wise, you have to eat enough protein, you have to get good sleep, you have to recover appropriately. So the body tends to respond then as a byproduct, and it takes the attention away from constantly trying to lose body fat and stuff,
Yeah, great point. The mindset part of this is so interesting. They've done studies where they had people just picture, lifting weights and really, in their minds that they were going through, lifting weights, like doing a curl, for instance. And they've shown that you can actually improve your strength, grow your muscles, just by doing that without actually lifting the weights. And then also that, if they then take those people and put them into the gym, how much more efficient they'll be when they're actually lifting the weight. So it's fascinating, that sort of mind-body connection in this context. This kind of leads us to the age-old question. If someone comes to you and they are, eating poorly and not exercising, not doing any sort of resistance training, what do you tackle first? What do you think is more important? How do you kind of approach that person?
So generally with my program now, I have a prerequisite of at least 6 months bare minimum experience with strength training. That being said, I have coached a hell of a lot of people over the years, right, who didn't have any experience, especially when I was personal training. So with the example you used there, the first thing would be simply, if they're not doing any strength training, right, I always say to people, the cornerstone of what you're doing with your exercise, fitness, and health, with your training element, it needs to be strength training, right? So I would literally start someone with strength training. I would say to hire someone in person. If you've never lifted weights before and you want to get into it and learn about the mechanics and actually get the consistency there and make that like a habit that you want to cement in, then definitely just start there. I would say to start there, and then I would do that probably for a month, 2 months or whatever before I even a month. It depends on the person. Obviously, the answer is always going to be it depends, right? But for the average person, strength training first, start there. Get some momentum with that, maybe a month, 2 months. And then I would start looking at, so just to give you an example, a better way to describe this, when I used to personal train people, I would have them just lifting weights, focusing on technique. Before I even mentioned anything really about nutrition, I would wait a few weeks, maybe even a month. And then I would start making small changes with that. Okay, let's have a look how you're eating outside of the gym. And a very, I think, helpful tool, I wouldn't recommend this long-term, of course, but just to track how much protein you're eating. There's so much value in that, even doing that for a few days or a week, right? It doesn't have to be, forever. Just to, because I would get my clients to go, right, let's have a look at how much protein you're eating first and foremost, right? And then I would get them to track it. And a lot of the times, especially if it's the average person, they're grossly under eating protein. So that's I'm not going to say easy win. It's a simple win for us then to go, okay, first thing we're going to do, increase protein intake. But the important thing is people try to change too much or they set unrealistic goals. Okay, I looked online. My protein target should be, let's say it's a 60-pound woman. I've got to have a pound, because they'll say about a gram of protein per pound of body weight is, I guess, kind of optimal if you're looking to build muscle and everything else. So they're going from, maybe half that or a third of that. I'm going to hit that target now, but you're not, to be realistic, the likelihood of you sticking to that and being sustainable with that is slim to none. So I would start them off slow and just increase protein a little bit. If I can get maybe some protein in for breakfast, because this is a big thing where I see a lot of people go wrong and not necessarily go wrong, but they struggle to hit protein is they're just having, really, they're not having any protein for breakfast essentially. And they're just having, carbohydrates or whatever. And then, they might have a little bit for lunch and dinner. And what I found is a lot of people, they don't really know what high protein is as well. A lot of people kind of say, yeah, I eat a lot of protein. And then you get them to track and it's like, they've had like a handful of nuts, a bit of cheese. And then if you're lucky, they've had like a protein shake. And again, they're grossly under eating. So it's educating people. And that's why I think there's some value in just tracking that. Maybe, you can use apps and stuff, just tracking it to get that awareness and understanding. So that would definitely be the first port of call. One, let's get momentum with strength training and do it appropriately as well. That's why I say, you need to be doing it appropriately, because a lot of people, they'll just start lifting weights, freestyling workouts, you got to, and pushing too hard. A lot of people are trying to go from 0 to 100. That's what people tend to do. So you got to do it appropriately with the right intensity and, technique and stuff. Then I would say protein, right? That's going to be the big rock, because that's ultimately going to help you maximize results, recover. And that's a whole nother rabbit hole, right? It's going to blunt your appetite. It's generally going to speed your metabolism up as well. So your body burns more calories by itself. And that's the beauty of those two things, lifting weights and having high protein. Your body's going to burn more calories by itself. I had this chat with Phil when we did the podcast. You want to get your body to automatically burn as many calories as it can by itself anyway, if you're looking to level up your physique and health. So they're the first two big rocks. And then obviously just movement is another kind of easy win, really, is just having a look at how much people are moving, because a lot of people back then, they used to come to me and go, I train a lot. They might already be doing strength training. And then when you shine a light on their movement, they're actually only doing like 3,000 or 3,000 steps a day because they've got a sedentary job and they weren't even aware of that. So again, I'll maybe get them to get a Fitbit or something like that, track their steps, and then they're aware of it. Okay, let's start with an extra 15-minute walk a day or an extra 2,000 steps. So again, setting realistic goals that I know that person can stick to, and that looks different from person to person. So they're the three kind of big rocks, and sleep is obviously goes without saying. That's always going to be number one, right? But that's another conversation.
I can remember there was a period when I had some physical challenges that kept me from lifting. And I had heard what Phil had talked about, that this whole thing of visualizing yourself doing this. And I love deadlifting. So I'd lay in bed at night and I would, in as much detail as I could, visualize myself loading the plates and stepping up to the bar and gripping it and bending down and feeling the bar pull up over my shins. And more than anything, it was kind of relaxing. I loved the feeling of doing that, and it gave my mind something to do rather than just run around like a chimpanzee on crack. But I can't say I ever saw strength improvements from that. And I'm wondering if it's because I was also eating like crap at the time.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. Yeah, absolutely. Protein intake is, when it comes to your strength and recovery as well, right, is key. But there's loads of factors that can come into that, really. But yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head. And obviously Phil will tell you as well, if it's like the old, cliche analogy, right? If you've got a car and you put in poor quality kind of gas in it, right, at some point it's going to burn out. It's the same sort of thing, right? When you're fueling your body and going to the gym to maximize performance. But yeah, there's loads of factors, and sleep is a big rock as well, right?
Yeah, let's dig into the protein a little bit further. As you're well aware, the recommended amount of protein that at least here in the US, the recommended dietary allowance for protein is 0.4 grams per kilogram of body weight. So it's actually about 1/5, 20% of, the recommendation that you mentioned and that I certainly give, which is 1 gram per pound of body weight. So, why do you think there's such a difference there in what the mainstream recommendations are around protein intake? What guys like you and I recommend for protein intake. And then I'd also like to get your perspective on sort of, what the best proteins are to be building that dietary approach around.
Yeah. So I would say first and foremost, I mean, if we go into that conversation of the advice that we get from the government and everything, right? I mean, if we just like join the dots, and in terms of nutrition, I mean, let's just be honest, to say the least, it hasn't necessarily been the best, right? So I think when it comes to the protein intake, they give you that amount, which is essentially probably going to keep you alive, right? But there's a fine line between having, I guess, I wouldn't even say that's adequate protein, the amount you mentioned there, to be honest. I would say for all the other things, the knock-on effect of having enough protein, it's like it's multifactorial, because when you look at that, I see this pattern time and time again. If someone, for example, came to me and they're eating the amount you said there, which I think you said 0.4 grams per kilo, they're going to be not making the best decisions with food. It's just a behavioral pattern I've noticed, because then they naturally tend to fill up the remaining amount of calories that the signal their body tells them to eat. They end up filling that up with, fats and carbs, and then generally just their macro balances out and they're overeating calories a lot of the time. It's just a pattern that I picked up on. So that's the first thing there. And in terms of the why behind that, it's kind of hard to answer that, but I really do think that it's just, and there's a difference between optimal and survival, right? So surviving and thriving. And, there's new research coming out now anyway, with the higher amounts of protein being beneficial anyway for lots of different things. But in terms of what you asked then about, sorry, what was the second question then you said about protein, types of protein?
Yeah, types of protein.
Yep. So the types of protein, I would always say, it's always going to come down to the animal proteins, right? I mean, we can't really argue that. The research is clear on this in terms of the bioavailability of the proteins, not just the number in grams, because you could hit, let's just say you hit an optimal amount of protein and you done it through plant-based foods or you did it through animal-based foods. Obviously, the animal-based foods, not only are they get the proteins, the amino acids going to be more bioavailable, but also you're going to get, depending on the types of animal sources you eat, you're going to get a lot of micronutrients. You're going to get all the benefits and the nourishment that you need from eating good quality. Obviously, quality matters, animal-based proteins, right? So I would say first and foremost, and it depends on what the person's goal is. So if the person is, looking to lose weight, and it really depends, but I would say just as a general rule of thumb, I would always go with the grass-fed beef as number one, because obviously it's probably one of the only foods you could eat by itself and likely not get a nutrient deficiency. But I definitely wouldn't necessarily recommend that, right? I just want to be clear here. I'm just giving you an example of kind of how powerful it is, because you get most of the micronutrients you need, minerals, etc., and a nice balance and the proteins and fats. So you get pretty much all the essential nutrients you need and high protein, right? Then obviously I would say eggs as well, getting them in daily, because again, the same sort of principle. Egg white, yes, and an egg white, you're going to get, say, 4 grams of protein. In the yolk, you're going to get about 2 or 3 grams. But in the yolk, an egg yolk is like the perfect multivitamin, basically, with the balance of micronutrients and the balance of fats, etc. So I would go with those two as number one, and then I would just say any kind of lean protein sources, whether that be chicken thighs or chicken breast, things like salmon, if you can get wild salmon, or ocean fish, salmon, mackerel, those kind of things, if you can get good quality, because then again you're getting omega-3s, you're getting a lot of different other nutrients in those foods, as well as the high protein. But then at the same time, if someone can't get away with many calories, then, it's tough to have those fattier, like if they're having salmon and beef every single day, it might be slightly too many fats for some people. But again, I would say to just go for that, really. And then, a lot of people do struggle, though, to be honest, guys, to hit it all through whole foods. Like if we be realistic here, most people are not going to eat that much meat. They're just not going to. The average person, they're going to really struggle to hit high optimal protein with just real foods. So I always, with some of my clients, a lot of my clients are quite an advanced level now, to be fair, but a lot of them I still have, having a protein supplement, but I only use that. A lot of people use this the wrong way. They just have it every day. I'll just have the protein shake, and then but that should be secondary. You should always be thinking, right, how can I hit my protein target through single ingredient foods, eggs, beef, chicken, fish, those kind of things, as opposed to having, protein shake. Protein shake is great backup, though. And if you're grossly under eating protein, I think it's going to be important to include that regular, at least to get you hitting the target. Plant-based foods, I just wouldn't really recommend as a protein source. But if there might be a lot of plant-based eaters here, and there's ways you can do it. I do have literally one client who's vegetarian and one who's plant-based, and we make it work. But obviously, they do have to have a supplement, and then they have to have like certain combinations of foods to kind of hit that, to make sure they're getting a good balance of amino acids, Hope that was helpful.
Yeah, definitely. The plant-based, the non-animal protein approach becomes very challenging because they really don't provide that complete amino acid profile that you need, and you have to sort of mix and match to get that or supplement. When it comes to protein powders, and I agree with you, they're certainly shouldn't be your primary source of protein, and they really should only be used if you just can't get it from whole real food in adequate amounts. What do you recommend when people are trying to figure out a good protein powder or protein supplement to use?
Yep. I always recommend, generally I'll point them towards, it's always the quality that matters, right? So I'll always point them towards some type of grass-fed, good quality protein powder, where it's not just, because I'll be honest, most of these protein powders out there, they've got the artificial sweeteners in and stuff, and people are just not aware of that and not aware of the ones to look out for. So I get my clients to avoid artificial sweeteners as much as possible. Obviously, it's not, going to be perfect in terms of never having them, but as much as possible. So with the protein powders, I would definitely point them towards some type of grass-fed protein, depending on where they're at. And there's a really good plant-based one I know as well in America, which actually has a really good balance of amino acids as well, and it tastes pretty good as well. So, did you want me to name like brands and stuff, or do you want me to just give you an example of the types?
No, I think just the types are good for us to kind of guide people on.
Yes, of course. Yeah, no, definitely go for a grass-fed Whey if you're going to get, and I always say to people, if you're going to eat a lot of beef, for example, I eat a lot of beef. So you got to make sure it's grass-fed and grass-finished ideally. The same goes for a powder. If you can get good quality, like grass-fed or organic or whatever it is, ideally grass-fed, because if it's organic, it can still be grain-fed. And just look at the reviews in your area and just go with that one. And I would recommend paying a little bit more to get a good one, as opposed to getting all the, and you look at the list of ingredients in most of these things, and there's like 50 ingredients, all of the names you can't pronounce on there in terms of the ingredients, right? The chemical names. So avoid those ones.
Yeah, and I don't know if this is kind of made it, to Australia or outside the US, but recently there are actually two brands that I'm aware of that have introduced beef protein powders. So these are actually protein powders made from beef, grass-fed, grass-finished beef. One of them even includes some organ, bits in it, I guess, desiccated organ, whatever the term is. So that's an interesting option as well. And that's kind of newer to the market but good way to get.
You made a good point there, Phil. Sorry, I better definitely touch on this, right? Because whey protein, a lot of people, they can't tolerate milk, right? Most people can't tolerate lactose. So remember, whey protein is derived from milk. So a lot of people are not going to do well digest, and people don't really have that awareness. They go, oh, I got this whey protein and I'm bloated. Why is that? Well, it's derived from milk. So definitely be mindful of that with the dairy if you're intolerant or you have issues digesting that like I do. And then that's a really good point. I forgot about that. They have got some really good grass-fed beef ones now, right? So that would 100% be a better option anyway, in terms of the balance of proteins and stuff as well.
Maybe time to get a sponsorship, Phil.
We may be. All I'll say is one of the brands around animal protein, beef protein powders. We've had a couple of the people behind that brand on the show in the past. So, but we haven't worked out the sponsorship deal with them yet. So I'll have to work those guys over.
Well, if you do, Phil, let me know. Yeah, because a lot of my clients will benefit from that.
There we go.
So I want to summarize what I understand here. I look at the demographics of our listeners. I try to pay attention to who's the fat part of our listeners. And I use that statistically, not anatomically.
Exactly. The less fat now, since they've been listening for a good amount of time.
So the majority of our listenership are guys are tend to be male and tend to be guys like Phil and I. 40s, 50s, and I might be slightly older than that, but I'm not going to cop to it. And they found something that resonates with Phil's message to get healthy, so you don't end up getting your chest cracked open and having a heart surgeon work on you. So what the message I'm hearing from you, Martin, is start with weight training, resistance training, even before you start worrying about the diet. And I think I understand why. So I want to drill down into the resistance training. We've got a man or a woman who's plus 40. They're out of shape. They know it's time. They've made the commitment. They've got a brief amount of time on a daily or a every other day basis that they can do some sort of resistance training. What's the very best 2 or 3 things they should be doing?
Yeah. So I would say there's a couple of options, right? If you've got limited time, and I always say this is the best place to start anyway, but the best way to do it is the one that's going to make you more consistent always, right? So the body weights, starting off with your own body weights, literally doing body weights. Maybe you could use some resistance bands. And just committing to, say, 20 minutes. It doesn't have to be a small amount of time, just so you can get connected to your body with basic movements. Like if you've never done much strength training, simply just doing a squat. I used to give you an example, I would get clients who'd never done any resistance training. I would get them just squatting down to a bench with their own body weight. So imagine you've got like a weights bench there, right? So it's, quite low to the ground-ish. And when you squat down, generally, you're going to be almost like you're sitting on a chair, like the back of your thighs are kind of parallel to the floor. I would get them to just squat down to the chair, sit on the chair for like a second, and then stand up, right? Literally do that, right? And just do a few sets, even one set of that, right? Like to on your first session, for example, then you build it up. Then you try and do 2 sets the next time, and you just really gradually build it up. So yeah, I would say if you've got limited time, I would say number one, I think the best option, if you've got experience with strength training, then, just go and do compound movements, right? So you could do literally, you could start with 2 sessions per week. If you've got some experience, go and do those compound lifts. I would say the 5 movements you want to include each week, right, is, squats, deadlifts, bench press, maybe, and then some sort of row, like a cable row, and then like an overhead press. If you can include them into your program, you could even literally just do 3 exercises per workout, right? So you could pick those compound, but compound means, you're using more than one muscle group. So if you know what you're doing, but if you're a beginner, I would say literally to learn about the mechanics. And I would say there is a lot of value in just, if you're in a position to do it, just get an in-person trainer, just so you can understand the fundamentals. Or just simply do a bodyweight program, maybe get some sort of program so you've got some structure there to follow, and just go and do bodyweight, or do that at home. Literally, like I say, squats, you could do, you can use your own bodyweight and bands and stuff to do some upper body stuff. It doesn't have to be complicated, but I would commit to doing literally just start off with like 2 sessions per week. If you could do 2 sessions per week and you can kind of cover the whole body. If you're doing bodyweight, for example, you could do bodyweight squats, you could do like push-ups or push-ups on an incline, because a lot of people, they're not going to be able to do push-ups on their foot, or even you could even put your knees down and do those type of push-ups where it's a bit easier. Get some resistance bands. Resistance bands are so inexpensive. You could get them for like $20 or something, maybe $30. And just literally the ones with handles on the end, people can picture that now. They're kind of like the long rubber bands with the handles on them. You could tie that to something and do rows, because postural stuff is so important, because everyone has a weak posture. Basically, most people have weak postural muscles. So rowing movements with the bands, and then you could even just do an overhead shoulder press with a band, for example. That right there, you've done legs with the squats, you've done back with the rows, you've done an overhead shoulder press, and then you've done like chest incline push-ups, for example, or even chest press with a band. Just throwing out just basic strength movements here. So they're the areas you want. And once you've done that, because when you're doing shoulders, back, and chest, you're actually working your arms anyway. So that pretty much covers the whole body. So it doesn't have to be complicated. So pick those compound movements and basically do them frequently. 2 workouts per week to start with, 2 full body workouts. Then if you could just really focus on being more active on top of that for the average person. So just walk more. Just keep it really simple and walk more, like an extra 15-minute walk a day, for example. And that's going to be a great place to start. But where most people go wrong, so many people go wrong with this, they go from 0 to 100. Yeah. And that's why most people fail, because it's not sustainable. You need to make changes that you can stick to. You need to make permanent changes. I want everyone to get this into their head. The changes you make need to be permanent lifestyle changes. Right. So you've got to start slow and you can add. And after a month, I've been consistent with those 2 sessions. Fantastic. I'll add a 3rd session in, and then you build that momentum slowly over time, rather than throwing a kitchen sink in at the start and then essentially sabotaging, which unfortunately is what most people do.
What would you say is a common area that people neglect when it comes to resistance? So resistance exercise, you mentioned the postural stuff. And I'd love to hear what, people who come to you and maybe they've been, training for a while, but not really doing it in a well-structured way. What do you find is most often neglected in that?
Yeah, and that's most of the people that come to me nowadays. They're normally at a good level with their training and they're in pretty good shape, but they want to optimize and get to the next level. So what I'll do with these people is I'll look at like the programming they're doing. And for the most part, they're training hard, but they haven't got that smart piece. So they're doing the typical, either doing the split training where they are doing the typical bro splits if it's a guy, or it might be a female and she's just scared.
What's the typical bro splits?
The typical bro splits, yeah. That is, going chest one day, biceps one day, back one day, shoulders one day. So essentially they're training each body part only once in a week. This happens a lot. So they're
don't forget leg day though. Leg day.
Oh yeah, skipping the leg day, of course. That old chestnut. That's what I did when I started lifting when I was 16. I literally skipped leg for 3 years, and it came back around to get me then. So I had to catch up for another 3 years. I was literally just training chest and guns for 2 years, and I'm not exaggerating. So nothing to do with vanity, obviously, or trying to attract the opposite sex at that age, of course it was. But yeah, so basically they're not training the body parts often enough. So this is a really good point, something for the listeners to be aware of is if you spread the volume out over the week. So a lot of people come to me, they're hammering the volume in each session. So they might do chest on a Monday. Then they're not touching chest for another week, legs on a Tuesday, no legs for another week, right? So they're, instead of doing all of that volume, let's just give an example. Let's say they're doing, for argument's sake, 21 sets on chest in one session, or 21 sets on legs in one session. Then they do it again a week later, right? If you spread that volume out, for example, over 3 days. So let's say instead of doing an hour of legs on a Monday, let's say you do 20 minutes Monday, 20 minutes Wednesday, 20 minutes Friday, right? So instead of doing maybe 21 sets in one session, you're doing 7 sets Monday, 7 Wednesday, 7 Friday. The research shows you're going to get way better results, right? And this was a game changer for me around about 7 years ago, when I started tapping more into the science, when I finished the bodybuilding stuff, and training at a moderate intensity generally, right? So that's why full body training is more beneficial a lot of the times. So hitting the body parts more frequently, it just changes the game. And people are blown away, like within the first, say, 4 weeks. They might have been training for a long time, years, maybe even decades, over a decade in some cases. And they see their body respond faster than they have in ages just within that first month, because they're hitting the body parts more frequently. They've toned down the intensity a little bit. So they're actually doing a little bit less intensity, and they get better results. So that is an important piece I think people should take away. And that's why I always say, most people listening to this now, the average person, 80 to 90% of people, or just everyone listening back to this, you're going to get better results doing full body, say 2-3 times per week, than you would be, hammering each body part, say, 5-6 days a week, especially if you're just starting out, because the likelihood of the behavioral thing, the likelihood of you sustaining 5 to 6 sessions a week, first and foremost, forever, is very low, unless you're an anomaly. And then secondly, it's just not a smart approach. You're going to get way better results for less time if you just do, full body, say 2-3 times per week, 3 times per week ideally, and you just do, say, 1 or 2 exercises per body part, 1 exercise per body part. So it could be squats, bench press, it could be a pull-up, it could be a shoulder press. And if you want to do arms and core on top of that, fantastic, that's a bonus. And then you do different exercises each workout for each body part, if that makes sense. And that's going to maximize results. So that frequency, that training frequency is key.
Different exercises for each body part on different days.
Yes.
So I'm going to do a full body workout 3 days a week.
Yep.
But my shoulder, I'm going to do shoulders 3 days. I'm going to do some sort of shoulder work 3 days a week, but it's a different exercise each day. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, that's right. That's right. And there needs to be a way I can send people. I've got like something I can send the audience if you want me to send you the link or whatever, just so they've got something to follow. But very simple. Good question. The compound movements, right? The old school movements are the ones that work. So for example, let's just use legs for example. I always say to include, and most people, 9 out of 10 people, they just can't squat properly with good form with a bar on their back. Like I've
quit squatting. I've just decided it's not worth it.
You've quit altogether?
Yeah, I deadlift.
Okay.
I don't squat.
Okay, cool. So yeah, I would say a goblet squat.
I'm an old
dumbbell in front of you. Are you able to squat though? You can squat with your body weight, and there's no injuries or anything preventing you from doing that.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Okay. Well, a simple thing would just be to hold a dumbbell in front of you, Jack, instead, and do that like a goblet squat. Just so you're doing that movement, because obviously it is a fundamental movement, right? We want to make sure we do that just for like longevity and stuff. And providing you haven't got any injuries.
I should have said I don't do back squats anymore.
Got you. Okay, that's fine. I was trying to give a bit of feedback then for the audience as well, because that would have been helpful for them as well, because a goblet squat. But yeah, I would just say, for example, for legs, do some form of a deadlift. Again, that's a fundamental movement, right? Especially as we get older. Picking stuff up off the floor, hip hinge, you've got to be able to do that, right? So some form of deadlift is very technical. It's the highest risk movement. So I have a disclaimer here. Don't just go and do barbell deadlifts from listening to this podcast. You've got to do it properly. So I'll get people doing, I would get people practicing the hip hinge first. So like a Romanian deadlift with a bar, for example, where you just hinge from the hips. So for the audience listening, your legs are kind of straight. You've got soft knees. You've got the bar in front of you or dumbbells, and you just, you push it, you slide in your hips back. But again, I don't want to recommend people do this if they're beginners. You need to know what you're doing with that, because it's high risk. But some form of deadlift, a single leg movement, then let's say on a Monday, you've got deadlifts, whatever type that is. It could be a sumo deadlift. It could be a single leg deadlift with dumbbells, or even a Romanian deadlift. Then on a Wednesday, you could do some type of single leg movement. So whether that's some type of lunge, ideally. Reverse lunge, I would always say is the best, because it's very functional. So 2 dumbbells by your side, step behind you, or back step lunge, whatever you want to call it, step behind you, and then push off the front foot and kind of alternate legs. That's more functional because you get more activation on the glutes there. And then on the Friday, for example, for legs, you could do some form of squat. So like a goblet squat. And it really depends on how advanced the person is and what body parts they want to focus on more. You know, you could do 2 exercises for legs, depending on the level of where you're at, or if you need to develop them more. But that's just an example, literally. So 1 exercise, per foot, and then you could do that for every body part. So chest would be an incline press on a Monday, some form of flat press with dumbbells on a Wednesday, and then a flat barbell press on a Friday, right? So again, it's not complicated. And for back, it would be a row, like a bent over row with a barbell on a Monday, a cable row, for example, on a Wednesday, and then a pull up on a Friday, right? So you see how simple it is, just making sure you're doing those movements which get you bang for your buck, essentially, and they're functional movements as well, which a lot of them we need to perform as we get older, you know?
I keep hoping somebody will come up with a program that doesn't have any of that stuff in it that I don't like doing. Like you just said, the single leg stuff, I hate.
So do I. Yeah, my clients hate it as well. Yeah.
It. I really
Bulgarian
want somebody
split squats.
to say,
Have you ever tried them, Jack?
Say what?
You ever tried Bulgarian split squats? Has anyone ever tried them?
God,
the most hated exercise on the planet.
Lord, it's the worst. Yes, it's the worst. It's absolutely the worst. And I'm sure it's probably pretty technical. I suspect I've done it wrong, but yeah. Okay.
Jack, you made a good point there. And I just wanted to, sorry to interrupt, but I really want to hammer this point home because you made a really good point. When you go to the gym, everyone listening, right? I say this to clients, don't necessarily look at it as a workout, right? Look at it as I'm going to practice the movements. And this is, I guess, a bit of advice for you as well, Jack, when you do it. And it's funny because the movements, I do this, I fall into this trap. I stop doing the movements I don't like, but we know those movements are the ones we need to do more of for the most part.
Exactly.
Because they are the ones that we suck at, right? And when we suck at stuff, we tend to avoid it, but we want to get better with the skill. So when you go to the gym, ladies and gents, just focus on that, right? I want to get good at the movements. I'm going to focus on practicing the movements like you would any other skill. It's very technical, right? Most movements. So when you have that mindset going into the gym, you get better results because you're refining the technique and nothing's going to beat that, you know?
I'll confess, I've never heard anybody say it that way. Just focus on perfecting the movement itself. That helps me. That gives me a different way to think about those single leg things that I hate so much. Do you normally find people are asymmetrically, are one side is stronger than the other? Is that fairly common?
Absolutely. And this is another easy win for client results because they avoid those movements. It's not easy. I'm gonna get rid of that word. It's a simple win, right? It's not easy. It's a simple win. Simple and easy are different, but those single leg movements, everyone needs to do more of, to be honest, including myself, because I tend to avoid them, right? I make excuses. Oh, it takes so much longer doing the single leg deadlift, because it adds a bit of excuses. So I just like to go in and just rip the weight like most of us. But I always do force myself to go back to that. Yes, everyone has discrepancies. Most people, pretty much everyone. So one side is more dominant. And that's how people end up getting injured as well. It's these subtle imbalancements that they have that you're not really aware of. You're distributing more side more weight, for example, on one side when you're doing a deadlift. So that's why, a single leg deadlift is actually very technical movements, but, practicing that, like I say, the practicing word, practicing that and getting good at it. And literally you can do this with no weight. This is a fantastic movement for the audience. Just balance on one leg and just reach out and touch your toe, keeping your spine straight, of course. So you're not just like rounding your lower back. Back straight, balance on one leg, right? Touch your toe. And even better, if you can pause at the bottom, right, for maybe 5 seconds where you're touching your toe and then stand up. Do 10 of those on each side and a few sets of that. And that's essentially the same movement as a single leg deadlift. Start there. Do those toe touchers. It gets you connected to the movement and obviously improves balance and stability. And those two things, balance and stability, are the key things with those movements. But yeah, just to answer your question, those single leg and single arm movements, you'll actually get way better results. You'll build muscle. So number one, you're going to build more muscle by doing those movements. And even single leg, single arm rows, or it could be like an alternate arm dumbbell press. lunges, Bulgarian split squats, any unilateral movement, which is single arm or single leg, you're going to build more muscle because it's novelty for the body and it's a weakness you have. And also you're going to get stronger when you go back to, say, squats, for example, or deadlifts. You get so much carryover, and you really kind of increase your strength then on those movements as well from doing that.
Before we wrap up this masterclass on training, and this really, I think, has been great. One other thing I'd love to hear your perspective on. One of the things that I have found most useful in advancing my training is slowing down. And you mentioned it before that, we want to go in there and rip out those sets and just, bang them out as quickly as possible. But really taking the time to do a set properly and slowly, to do each movement, kind of properly and at a controlled pace, I find is a big game changer when it comes to resistance exercise.
I'm glad you said that, right? Because I almost skipped the most important part there, which is the tempo. And this is something I'm always playing with clients. For example, for the audience or for you guys, right? How many times you look around the gym and see people doing slow reps? I mean, it's very rare. I don't think I ever see it, to be honest, right? No one does it. Pretty much not anyone does it. Again, it takes longer to do the session. That's my excuse. So it just takes too long. I want to be in and out in an hour. But no, that is one of the most important, I would say, the best variable you can play with is just simply slowing down the reps and taking the weight down. I can't stress this enough, especially guys, because when I used to coach guys back in the day, it'd be like, yeah, I can do more weight. No, you can't. Actually, we're going to take the weight down and focus on your technique, whereas generally females would be, oh yeah, I don't think I can do more, but they can. So slow down the reps. And if you can do, for example, like a 3-second negative portion of each rep, right? So for example, when you're doing a squat, 3 seconds roughly on the way down, pause at the bottom for 1 or 2 seconds, and then come up for maybe 1 second, right? So there's slow reps. Each rep's going to take you 5 or 6 seconds. But that negative portion, remember, for everyone as well, generally, you're actually damaging the muscles or essentially, I guess, sending a muscle building signal more on that negative portion of the rep. So like slow down on the way down on the lower end portion of the rep. So whether that's a squat or a dumbbell chest press, as you're lowering it down to your chest, 3 seconds, pause at the bottom for a second or two, and then push up. And you do that on all those movements, and I guarantee you're going to get fantastic results. And a lot of people talk about, I don't want to kind of overwhelm people here with information, but a lot of people talk about, progressive overload, which is the key for building muscle. For example, you have to add more volume, whether that's simply adding a little bit more weight week on week or adding more reps. But no one ever talks about slowing down the reps. And that is another way to overload the body. I would argue for most people, the best way to overload the body, slow down the reps instead. Or I do this with clients, slow down the last 3 reps on every set, right? Do that on every single set. Just slow down the last 3 reps, make them slow, make them painful, right? And watch what happens, right? So that is, I'd say, one of the most important variables. And I'd love everyone to kind of really focus on that, because that makes you focus. It forces you to focus more on technique and that mind-muscle connection as well.
Ooh, that's a good point there, is that I'm at the end of a set, and that's normally where you're not physically wearing out, but you're kind of mentally wearing out. And if I force myself to slow down there, aside from this exercise of the will to make it happen, I'm also having to focus much more on the actual technique, because that's where we get injured, is when the technique breaks down. Seems like it. I know it's been for me. I love that. I've picked up a couple of little things here today that I've never heard before. I'll go back.
Yeah,
and
I think
listen to
this has been a great masterclass on training, and certainly a very important aspect of improving your health. So Martin, for people that want more, and I'm sure they're going to want more now, how do they connect with you?
Yes. So first of all, thanks for having me on. I really, really enjoyed that. Some great questions there as well. So yeah, you can find me on my podcast, first and foremost, is Optimize Your Body. It's optimize, not spelled the American way. It's spelled with an SE on the end instead of a ZE. So Optimize Your Body is on all platforms. Definitely check that out. So much good content on there. My main platform, I guess, is Instagram. So I would definitely follow me on there at Martin Silva Fitness. And yeah, in terms of any coaching inquiries and stuff like that, the link is in my bio on Instagram. But yeah, so you can just basically, there's a coaching inquiry form basically in the link in my bio on Instagram. I currently don't have a website. I'm just building a new website at the moment. Yeah, and that's pretty much the main two platforms, I guess. I think I might be missing one here. But yeah, the best way is just to go to my Instagram, because the link in my bio got my YouTube channel and stuff there as well, which is Martin Silva Fitness.
All right, very good. And you mentioned you had a giveaway or something that you provide for our listeners.
Absolutely, yeah. I've got a few actually. I would just come to mind then. I've got one which is like a 4-week training program, basically encompassing the stuff I talked about then, the full body stuff. But there's actually so there's one resource actually. It's got some nutrition stuff in there and training and an example training program, like a 1-month kind of phase. So I think that'll be the best one. Yeah, I can send that over to you if you want. And I think the link there is you put your email address in there and it's for my email newsletter. So you click it, you put your email address in, and then you get my emails or whatever twice a week, and you get the resource as well. So it's up to you. I can either send you that link or I can just send you the resource wherever you guys would prefer. I'm happy to send that over.
Very good.
Yeah, perfect. Go ahead, send the link, and
I think I've got that. I think I've got that through his link tree.
Perfect.
Oh, that's right. That's the one. Yeah, I think. Yep.
Yeah. All right. So we'll provide all that information, all these links in the show notes for our listeners. It'll be there. Very good. Well, Martin, I've really enjoyed this. Normally we get real scientific and nutrition and calories and white blood cells and I dig that stuff. I really do. But I didn't have any idea it's been personally inspiring for me today, because I've been a little stuck. To be frank, I've been a little stuck with the lifting lately, and it's just inspiring to have somebody talk me through some of those things. I feel like I've got a mental strategy now to kind of break me out of my rut, and I'm appreciative. Thank you.
Thanks for having me on, man. Appreciate your kind words.
All right, I have
Inspire.
one more question.
That's a big word. You just blew my ego up. So thanks for that.
I have one more question for you, and this may take you right back down. What happened to
Go ahead.
What happened to your Welsh accent?
I know it's weird, right? It's kind of all over the place now, my accent. To me, in my head, I still sound, well, we call them Valley Commando. I don't know if people have ever, some people might, unfortunately, would have seen the MTV thing back in the day called the Valleys. So for anyone who doesn't know, in Wales, I'm from the city, the capital, Cardiff. And outside of that, generally, you've got the valleys, which is like mountains and then little suburbs. And they call it the valleys, essentially. But in my head, I sound like what we call a Valley Commando. I sound really Welsh in my head, but people say, no, you've got like a weird accent. It's like a bit of Australian and a little bit of Welsh. And then you don't sound Welsh anymore. So I don't know what's happened to it, Jack.
Well, I think pretty well all the English speaking world, as a rule, loves to hear the Australian accent. So it was probably a wise decision on your part to pick that up. I approve.
For sure. It's a win.
All right. For Martin Silva and Dr. Philip Ovedi, I'm Jack Heald. This is the Stay Off My Operating Table podcast, and we'll talk to y'all next time.
Chances are you wouldn't be listening to this podcast if you didn't need to change your life and get healthier. So take action right now. Book a call with Dr. Ovedi's team. One small step in the right direction is all it takes to get started. Contact us at ifixhearts.com/talk. That's ifixhearts.com/talk.